There's a skill most college freshmen lack, and it's the reason many of us walk around campus depressed, anxious, and restless. This skill is called optimal zone resilience. It's the art of partnering with your autonomic nervous system towards states of calm, connection, and energy, what researchers collectively call the optimal zone. The problem is without practice, the autonomic nervous system is exactly that, autonomic. And lacking awareness, we get triggered constantly throughout the day, shoved into the defensive zone like a paper syllabus after the first day of classes. In the defensive zone, we can feel depressed, restless, and anxious. And I learned this the hard way. During my sophomore year at Cornell, I was building Obsidian University with my business partner, John Maverick. On the outside, everything was great. I was maintaining a full course load, a girlfriend, 4 clubs, content creation schedule, and six-pack abs. But I was deeply in the sympathetic defensive zone. The experience was so negative that it launched the journey I've been on ever since. A huge part of my mission in helping college students is building optimal zone resilience so you can navigate what I went through with half the suffering. And to do this, over the last 6 years, I've created over 700 YouTube videos, articles, and podcasts. I've taught hundreds of college students through Cornell Outdoor Education, workshops, and 6 self-made courses. I've worked with the #1 gamification consultancy, the Octalysis Group, where I've learned to understand motivation and some of its roots in dysregulation. And I've read 500 plus books like The Body Keeps the Score, Thinking Fast and Slow, and Emotional Intelligence 2.0. All of which is to say, I've spent an unreasonable amount of time thinking about why college students feel terrible. My parents are thrilled. And in the last few months in particular, I've been a part of Robert Gilman's community, Bright Future Now, which is a major part of this video because a lot of that is about optimal zone resilience. All of that has led to a map that I want to share with you. We're going to explore why so many students are chronically in the defensive zone, where those triggers are actually coming from, and how to uncover your personal ANS map so you can build the missing skill of optimal zone resilience. By the end, you won't just understand stress differently, you'll have an actual practice for navigating it. So, why are so many students chronically in the defensive zone? To understand why, we need to understand what the autonomic nervous system actually does. The ANS is the part of your nervous system that regulates breathing, heart rate, and digestion without your conscious input. It's ancient, with origins back to over 500 million years ago. And beyond regulation, its other major role is threat detection. So through a process called neuroception, the ANS constantly is scanning your environment to see if there's anything that could be threatening. If it's safe, you can be in your optimal zone. Yeah. But if it's not, it's the ANS's job to put you into the defensive zone, which is great, actually. You want a functional ANS because otherwise, well, you likely would not be watching this and reveling in my incredible, terrible jokes. And I need you alive because the YouTube algorithm is dire enough. Here's the catch, though, is the ANS can't tell the difference between a bear and a bad grade. So this threat detection evolved on the savannah. It was designed for lions and rival tribes and poisonous berries, but now it's operating in an environment of Canvas notifications, social comparison, and dining hall small talk. It's still detecting threat triggers even though you're not in physical danger. So as the result, most students are perfectly physically safe, but psychologically we're walking defensive zone vortexes. Which begs the question, where do these triggers come from? If you zoom out, there's 4 interconnected spaces. I talk about them through the lens of Ken Wilber's integral theory, which you don't need to know, but The way that he talks about it in that theory is there's different quadrants of life that you can experience these triggers inside of. The first is the I space, which is your inner world. Triggers can come here because students aren't building OZR personally or in classes. There's no meditation habit, there's no reflection practice, there's no conscious relaxation practice. Check out my video on conscious relaxation above if you want to learn to do it. That we take classes on organic chemistry and medieval literature, but nobody sits us down and says, here's how you notice when your mind is screaming at you. The second is the we space, our culture and our relationships. Unfortunately, our social norms don't promote emotional awareness, especially for guys. Deep emotional conversations are rare in most friend groups, and sometimes the relationships themselves are the trigger. The third is the it space, your body and your immediate environment. Unfortunately, most students' exercise is the walk to class. And hell doesn't exist out there. It actually also exists in men's dorm rooms, which is why another additional it space trigger of the defensive zone. Then add on to that chronic nutrition, sleep, and terrible exercise difficulties, and it's easy to see why so many triggers come from that space. And then finally, we have the it space, which is the systems and structures around you. Dorms with no quiet spaces, social media architectures designed for comparison, and then grade curves that pit students against each other. Now, here's where it gets tricky is students mistake these triggers as purely external realities, things happening to them that they can't control. But every external challenge is rooted in an internal one. The student who blames the professor for exam stress might actually be avoiding their own time management shadow. This doesn't mean external factors aren't important. They absolutely are. But the journey to rooting in the optimal zone starts with learning to navigate your internal world. How do you do that? The first step is learning the two paths to the defensive zone. And most students only know one, right? So all the triggers above, they can have those two paths in those 4 different quadrants. The first path is the acute trigger. This is an exam date announced 2 days early. A friend saying something that cuts deeper than you might like. The trigger hits like a wave and you know you've been knocked off balance. But the other trigger is chronic triggering. Perpetual busyness without rest, a nagging lack of purpose humming between your classes, no conscious relaxation habit. This trigger is more like water slowly rising around you until by the time you realize it, you've already been drowning for weeks. So, 2 distinct pathways in, and they compound on each other. Chronic depletion makes your system vulnerable to acute triggers more. And most students only notice the wave, so they miss the water level rising entirely. As we begin to understand the ANS and why we're triggered into the defensive zone, that's when we can now move into the 6 different ANS states so that we can understand more deeply where we are at any given time and therefore navigate into the optimal zone more. So the ANS map isn't just a switch between fine and not fine. It's a continuous landscape with 6 distinct regions. 3 are in the optimal zone and 3 are in the defensive zone. What determines whether you're in the optimal zone or the defensive zone is one thing: whether your ventral vagal system is online or not. Now, the ventral vagal branch sounds very complicated, but all it is one half of your parasympathetic nervous system, the system that controls regulation when you're safe. So when offline, the other branches, the dorsal vagus and sympathetic, they operate and are the anchor. So it's the same activation, but a completely different experience. The dorsal vagus, the other part of your parasympathetic nervous system, is responsible for regulation of the lower half of the body, the inner functions, whereas the ventral vagus is more the top half, like your mind, your eyes, and whatnot. And the sympathetic controls both parts, but more in a fight or flight outer function way. So each of these parts of your ANS can create 6 different combinations with feelings mapped to each. I'm borrowing an image from Robert Gilman's Bright Future Now just to show you how it works. So if you're listening, no worries, you can keep listening, but here's the ANS map so you can see the defensive zone and optimal zone a little better. And you can also map at any given time where you are by identifying the feelings you're having with the place on the map. Now, this is a very basic mapping. There's many more feelings that could be associated with each. And often you're could be feeling a mix of different feelings. So the point is more to get a general vibe of where you are, not just to put yourself into a box. Now, let's get more clarity on each part of the map so that you can become a master mapper. The defensive zone has 3 different regions. There's the dorsal vagus dominant. Don't have to say that, just say lower left. It's easier. This is withdrawal, shutdown, depression with an inner focus. Your heart rate drops, thinking slows, memory gets impaired, and taking action feels like walking through wet cement. Sympathetic dominance is the bottom right. This is fight or flight territory with an outer focus. Heart rate spikes, attention narrows, thinking becomes rigid and categorical. At the mild end, you're just irritable, but at the more extreme, it's pounding heart, tunnel vision, rage, or even terror. Then we have the dorsal sympathetic, which is the bottom center. This is the least recognized region and the most confusing because it's both inner and outer oriented. Like you care enough to be distressed about not doing work, but can't marshal resources to do it. You're in this state where like you can draft an email to your professor explaining you need an extension, then you like rewrite it 4 times and then you don't even send it. You're in this sort of weird mix between restlessness and lethargy. The optimal zone also has 3 regions, and they're like the opposite of the defensive zone. The ventral dorsal blend is the upper left, and here the body is oriented towards restorative inner functions, often through meditation, mindfulness, or journaling. In the ventral vagal dominant, which is the middle, this is the relational core, the center of the optimal zone. It's neither internally oriented or externally, but rather like a balance of both. This is where you're the most capable of compassion, of deep listening, of connection with others. And finally, in the ventral sympathetic blend, the top right, this is where your sympathetic energy is held in safety. You have creative drive, vigorous play, exploration, and flow. So what I encourage you to do with this is map where you are on the ANS throughout your day. Just notice. It's absolutely invaluable. Like literally just write down every hour or so, where am I on the map? When I first started, I discovered that I tend to be almost always in the top right, the middle center, or slightly in the bottom right. And that was very powerful for me because it made me realize, oh my God, I'm too action oriented. I need to be a little more, to just relax. And I've tried to embody that through playing more video games again, through just sitting with absolutely no expectation of what that sitting will bring. And I think it's brought a lot of good things. It'll take a lot more work in order to see the fruits of my labor, but it came through mapping myself on the ANS, leading me to realize that I needed to change. So now that we know what the ANS mappings are, why we get triggered, and why it's important, how do we actually build our optimal zone resilience? Here's the skill. There's 3 different steps to it. Step 1 is witness and embrace. There's a part of you that can watch the trigger without being the trigger. I call this self-witnessing, which is grounding in the awareness, the witness behind all of experience, and coming at it with non-judgment, non-clinging, and love. You don't need to be a meditator to start. You just need to notice what's going on. And this helps you partner with your body. You can have a few slow nasal breaths, a releasing of the jaw, drop the shoulders from your ears. And as you feel the defensive zone pulling you under, name what's happening. I'm triggered. My chest is tight. My thoughts are racing. Don't fight it. Just another way of making this into a defensive zone, bringing you to the defensive zone, is if you fight being in the defensive zone. Embrace the feeling. And if you have resistance to embracing the feeling, embrace that resistance. Sometimes you can't get out of the defensive zone. You just have to realize you're there and accept that and love it. Which brings us to the second step, reflect. Once you've created space, get curious. What triggers you? How is it affecting you right now? Why did you get triggered that way? This connects directly to journaling. All right, journaling level 1 is about what happened. And then as I define level 2 journaling is about how it affected you and why. Why are you triggered by that? What experience in your past might be leading to this? What shadows? Check out my shadow journaling video to learn more about how to do this particularly. And then the last step is to resoil, reseed, or relocate. This is where you imagine your inner world as a garden. Your emotional state is the soil. Your self-concept is the seed. And your external environment/behavior is the location of the garden itself. So when something goes wrong in the garden, you have 3 different options if you're in your defensive zone. You can resoil, which means changing the emotional texture directly. So if you're angry, you could consciously shift that emotion into something more workable. It could be anxiety into excitement, shame into love, or anger into anticipation for exercise. You're changing the soil so that something different can grow. Reseeding means changing your self-concept to shift your relationship to the challenge itself. So the exam didn't go well, and instead of spiraling into, I'm not smart enough, you plant a different seed. Like, this is data about my study method, and I need to improve it. You're not changing what happened, you're changing who you are in relation to what happened. And then finally, we have relocating, which is the simplest. It just means making an external change to navigate the internal one. So it could be leaving the room, could be going for a walk, could be changing your study spot. Sometimes that's literally all it takes to get out of the defensive zone. And the beauty of these 3 moves is that they work together, right? You might relocate to a quiet spot on campus, do some diaphragmatic breathing to resoil, and then journal through a reseeding of the belief that was holding you back. 1 practice, but 3 layers to that practice. And this builds cumulatively. Each cycle through the process reduces the charge around whatever defensive zone was triggered. So it gives your brain fresher memories of how you can respond, slowly replacing the old groove with the new one. And over time, the optimal zone stops being something that you want to be in, you aspire to be in, and starts just being who you are as you witness, as you reflect, and as you resoil, reseed, or relocate. You start to just be in your optimal zone all the time. Because the optimal zone is a place that don't feel bad if you can't be in it all the time as well. Like, one of the mistakes to make here is to say, I have to be in this place all the time now that I know about it. Oh my God, I'm in the defensive zone. This sucks. When I first learned about this years ago, it was very hard for me to realize how often I was in the defensive zone. But the optimal zone isn't a place that you arrive at and then never leave. It's a place you learn to return to again and again with a little more grace each time. And one day you'll be almost entirely in the optimal zone all the time. And then another day you'll be in the defensive zone almost the whole time. And maybe that's the whole point, not to build a life where nothing triggers you, but to build a relationship with yourself that's honest enough, patient enough, and loving enough to come back home when it does. I wish that I had that insight when I was a sophomore in college, when I was doing all those Obsidian University club girlfriend stuff back then, because, man, I would have saved myself a lot of suffering. Thankfully, you don't have to suffer through all that. You can move into your defensive zone with optimal zone with consciousness. That's it. If you like this video, you'll love my free college freshman cosmic journaling kit. It's a gamified journaling system with over 1,000 journaling questions that'll help you grow your emotional intelligence, your ability to get in the optimal zone, and your purpose in just 15 minutes a day. So check it out in the description below if you want to practice what was talked about in this video. As always, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. Eat some peanut butter, and bye-bye.